more than ever, we need a Pathfinder.
I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put the blame on me. Don't put the blame on me. Guardian is mine.
He has access!
No more mercy. Kill them all. I'm only human. I made mistakes. I'm only human. All it takes is to blame on me. Don't put the blame on me. I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put the blame on me.
This is perhaps the hardest review I've ever written. It's gone through multiple rewrites. I even claimed this review was finished on our social media pages, and I felt a wave of relief just wash across my conscience. That was right before I scrapped that rambling mess and started again in frustration. And now, I realize how much my experience writing this review reflected that of my playthrough of Mass Effect Andromeda. At time, it is a triumphant return to the form for the series, but some of the time it's a messy and muddled pile of mediocrity. Most of the time, it's somewhere in between. Joy and pain, fun and frustration. Mass Effect Andromeda is the worst epitome of yin and yang that gaming has to offer. This theme of hot and cold starts immediately with Andromeda's character creator. While the options for a custom writer are plentiful and varied, it is inevitable that at some point in the game, his or her face will look like a puddle of mud. Certain lighting effects will cast Ryder in a wonderful warm light, before he steps into another light angle and seemingly grows tumors in his cheeks. This rocky start just continues into a cluttered and frankly confusing opening sequence in which no characters ever really get a chance to be established, and the player is just kind of thrown into the action. Now, for some games this may work well, but it just feels clunky here. Mass Effect has always been known for building incredible worlds and allowing the player to fall into them, piece by piece. The plot stumbles along until eventually Ryder is given the position of Pathfinder, basically the de facto leader of this great adventure to colonize the Andromeda galaxy. Without getting too into the weeds here, the entire sequence feels very forced. Another character was supposed to receive the Pathfinder title, as she was next in line. It basically functions like a military outfit, but Ryder receives the position instead. The reason I'm sharing this is because it's the perfect embodiment of all of Andromeda's missed opportunities. Ryder's promotion should have created an instant rivalry with this party member, which would have created a fresh and unprecedented twist on how to present fellow party members as the game progresses. Instead, she just shrugs it off, and that's that. The entire plot of Andromeda is seemingly off. Any number of NPCs in this game will give you a long-winded chat about why they left the Milky Way. And apparently, generally, it's because the Milky Way wasn't good enough, as if that entire galaxy has been fully colonized, as if there aren't uncharted areas still remaining to seek out. The only real reason these people should have left was to escape the coming Reaper invasion, as the Arks, giant floating space stations, one for each of the principal Mass Effect species, left just prior to the start of Mass Effect 3. It makes perfect narrative sense to have explained that this was a way for the primary races of the galaxy to ensure their survival from extermination. But alas, they just felt like leaving. For science, apparently. All of this just kind of sums up the one major flaw with Mass Effect Andromeda. It struggles to get things started, to get things off the ground. Nearly all of the character introductions are so stilted and ham-fisted. There were even a handful of times where I remember asking myself out loud, wait, this person is a party member? Wait, when did I even pick them up? Other characters come in with some incredibly cringeworthy dialogue, which likely ruined those characters permanently for many players, despite what they may end up changing into later on. What makes all of this so hard to take is that once the first 3 to 5 hours is out of the way, Andromeda really opens up. It's a pretty damn good game. No game should take 4 hours to make itself worthwhile though. But just in case you decide to stick with it, here's what you can expect to find. When the player finally gets full access to the system, the beloved Mass Effect formula kicks into high gear. Flying back and forth from planet to planet, running around the ship to build relationships with the fellow crewmates, and constantly fidgeting with RPG menus are all pleasantly present. In fact, Andromeda adds a bit of management mini-games to watch over, and every time Ryder returns to his ship, you can get to weapon crafting, upgrading Andromeda's initiative's home base, the Nexus, by awakening specific parts of the crew that will then give you certain benefits, including resources, money, or bonuses to perks. And lastly, you can dispatch elite squads across the system to perform dangerous missions and bring back powerful items. Andromeda does a great job of tying in the task of establishing and building fledgling colonies with the player's actual actions and missions from planet to planet. Every successful mission feeds resources back into improving the colonies abroad. Sadly, most of the side content here is as interesting as staring at cardboard, largely due to rather bland selection of locations. Do you guys remember Dragon Age Inquisition? How the open world was split into various pieces, and each of those pieces was littered with a bunch of crappy to-do list missions and half-hearted dialogue sequences where the player was entertained only by spinning the camera around 360 degrees because conversation with side NPCs was never given the full BioWare dialogue treatment? Yeah, that's the exact same situation here. Andromeda is Inquisition in space. Most of these worlds feel utterly devoid of life or anything really even remotely worth exploring. Mostly they're littered with a dead alien civilization, which would be interesting if the ruins themselves weren't so goddamn boring. It doesn't help that the best the Andromeda Initiative could cook up to explore these worlds was a crappy, near-future NASA truck that can barely chug up mild slopes. Just let me drive around the freaking planet. And why are there only like 6 species of wildlife across this entire system of planets? It can be really easy to focus on the negative with Andromeda, if that hadn't become obvious. But it nails a few things right on the head, including the part of the game that takes up the vast majority of the hours actually spent with it. Combat. It's the best the series has ever been, seriously. It's incredibly fast and fluid. Ryder is able to just leap and bound across the battlefield, pinning headshots one moment, turning around and swiping a 6 cyber sword through an enemy's torso. It just doesn't get old. Just the sheer mobility and access to all the various class suites keeps combat new and interesting, even over dozens of hours. Ryder can create profiles, which allows him to switch certain sets of perks and skills from all the various class trees. So for example, one profile will have Ryder act as a combat infiltrator, using a cloaking device to sneak in behind the enemies and then blast them with a bunch of killer nanites. And then maybe, there's a couple left, finish them off with an inferno grenade. Switch to another profile, and suddenly Ryder is literally throwing enemies at other groups of enemies and chucking biotic mass effect fields of death around the battlefield. Many of the combat powers are creative, they're fun to use. Now that said, the ball and chain here is that the menu used to create and equip these profiles is fucking confusing and ugly to look at. It took me a while to even piece together the various options, and it may cause other players to never really experiment. Now, regardless, I never really got tired of hopping out of the stupid truck to take on a group of baddies, as I knew it was going to be a blast every single time. Now, another strength here, eventually, are the cast and crew. While the introductions are often rushed or poorly written and acted, the eventual payoff is actually well worth the initial suffering. These characters are as interesting and varied as every other group of party members the series has had to offer to date. One of my personal favorites is Jal, a member of the only new alien race actually introduced for Andromeda, with the exception of the antagonistic Ket. These aliens are called the Angara, and the writers did an excellent job establishing their culture, aesthetic, and current struggle that lent a badly needed weight to story proceedings. The emotional stakes they're also well highlighted by a surprisingly well-rounded musical score. The new menu music and much of the orchestral and electronic tracks do a really fine job of establishing the tone of the game. All the more reason to get past those bad intro hours. Now, much was made of Andromeda's many technical faults at launch, and boy, there are a lot of them. It took a good long time to get a patch out, and let me tell you, the patch didn't fix many of the problems.
Espionage is a job that follows you home, or across galaxies.
Until there's nothing for it but to grow a conscience. Let's be frank, there are too many inconsistencies aboard our Ark. They only make sense if someone betrayed us to the Ket. My best suspect is a biologist, Dr. Adden, but the evidence is thin. I need a Pathfinder to verify what I've found, or I risk arresting an innocent man.
Yeah. Things like this aren't common enough to ruin the game, but they're just common enough to realize that EA did not give BioWare Montreal enough time to get this game sorted out. Oh, and yes, the facial animations, they're garbage. Especially after playing something like Uncharted. It's actually hard to imagine that Andromeda came out after A Thief's End. Now, all this said, I never felt like these technical issues got in the way of the enjoyment. I mean, they did get in the way in a certain aspect, but I never ran into a game or quest-breaking glitch, and combat was running as smooth as butter the vast majority of the time. For all of its faults, of which there are many, Mass Effect Andromeda has some extremely high moments. Moments I don't want to ruin for anyone in this review that might be listening and has not played the game yet, but they're so good it almost makes me regret that EA rushed this game out so fast. And strangely enough, no matter how much I bitch about all the problems this game has, I look back on my 70 hours with this game quite fondly. BioWare Montreal definitely had something here, but it was sullied by inconsistent writing, a truck full of technical issues, and dated design. The short of it comes down to this: if you're a huge fan of the Mass Effect series, take that grain of salt and buy the game. In the end, it does become worth dealing with its faults to receive its best moments. However, that's really the only crowd I can confidently recommend the game to, as its mediocrity would likely turn away anyone who isn't emotionally attached to the franchise. And it feels good to have finally released this review. While it was a challenging experience for me as a writer, it ends up being worth the journey, just like Mass Effect Andromeda.